Well, maybe I could ask a question.
Yeah, that's a good way to start.
Could I?
Yeah.
Your new record is orchestrated. You've got what? How many horns or strings?
6 horns.
6 horns. Joe, you've done a big band side.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, big band.
Could you guys tell me about the experience of working in that configuration and like that? I mean, why did you decide to do it, John?
Well, just something I've been aiming for years and never quite done. I mean, I always would write a tune and end up playing it in a small group, you know, with quartet or quintet, and saying, okay, that's fine, you know. But I always would write the thing and hear other voices in my head beyond just, you know, or imagine how it could be orchestrated. And I just forced myself to get off my duff and do it, you know. And I know Joe will understand the, you know, the detail that you have to go to, even 6 or 7 horns. Just scoring for that, you know, the horns in rhythm really kicked my butt. You know, I mean, I had the tunes, and then to sit down at the piano and actually figure out all those lines I supposedly heard in my head and to commit it to paper was another story. So it was quite a thing. But it's just something I've always heard actually all the time, and never quite did.
Right, that's kind of something that I got into hearing larger groups when I was probably about 14, 15 years old, playing in the what they used to call the concert bands in high school. And as fate would have it, I was trying to write some things, if you can believe that, when I was in high school, trying to write some marches and stuff like that. Trying to write some things, not jazz-wise, even though I'm hearing plenty jazz at that time on record, and I've got ideas that just keep storing themselves in my brain. And there's a point where I want to try to write some of this stuff down, because this becomes a part of what I like, is big bands, or a lot of horns coming from that time frame, and coming from the time that I was trying to write these things down, mistransposing parts. I don't know if you've ever done it. You probably have. We've all done that, where you mistranspose one part of 5 parts, and the thing comes out sounding just absolutely
And so the E flat euphonium or something was playing a whole step off or something.
Oh man, it's just, that's the worst. That's enough to really discourage you. But fortunately for me, I found out what the mistake was that I made, and I went back and corrected that, and what came out sounded pretty good, and it was enough to get me inspired to write a little more, you know. And this was a long time ago, 14 years old. I'm 59 years old now, you know. But I got a band started here along with Kenny Dorham about 65, 66, somewhere in there, and started to want to get more involved in the writing aspect of what I was doing as a improviser. And the best way to do that is to put a band together. You know, I always felt like I was intruding on someone's sacred ground if I would take a chart into someone else's rehearsal and say, "Look, man, can you just play the chart down for me?" I'm not made that way. So I put this band together, I started writing some things out, 1 bar at a time. And it sounded pretty good. I mean this literally, 1 bar. Come into the rehearsal the next day, I'd have 2 more bars. And then the rehearsal the next day, I've got 8 bars. And so 8 bars is a chorus, you know. You play the first 8, the second 8, you lay out on the bridge, and you play the last 8.
That's 32.
That's 32 bars, the whole chorus right there. Okay, then I got the weekend. I'm getting more inspired in this, and my writing, I guess my knowledge is increasing there, and I'm getting a little better at it. And the guys seem to appreciate just playing these notes that I put together for them. You know, 5 saxophones, 5 trumpets, 5 trombones, 3 rhythm. And this is something we got started in 66. We got into the studio to record these 15 or 16 charts that I had put together in 91, and just this past June we finished it. And during that time, I guess my writing had improved, the orchestration part, understanding how to deal with an orchestra, the psychological parts, I mean, of dealing with these geniuses out there, and and playing some music and having a good time at it. And after a while, it got to be something that I really wanted to do. And we finally did. I've got some other projects that involve more than the typical format that I'm usually found in, quartet, trio setting. And it was a great experience. I'm really proud of this. I'm not so sure how well it'll do out there in the marketplace, but whether it does, whether it makes the kind of noise out there that gets some sort of recognition by the masses is not important. I mean, it's important that we did it, we finished it, and I don't think it sounds that bad, but I don't know what I'm supposed to say that or not.
You're not. That's great, man. That band that you had with Katie, did he do big band, write big band charts?
He had one chart that he brought in, and he had a couple of charts that were charts of other people that he was in his possession.
Yeah.
So you get the 18 guys together, you got to have something for them to do.
Right. So all of a sudden.
Right. And that just gave me time to put this one bar down.
Yeah.
And put the two the next day.
But I really know what you mean, because it takes a long time to write. I mean, I was dealing with 7 horns, but to write, for whatever that is, 16 or whatever you had.
Yeah.
I mean, you can spend on one bar of music, you can spend forever. And Gil Evans used to tell me about that, how he would sit down. He said, I don't want to write anymore. My back is messed up. This was when he was in his 70s. I said, my back, look at me. I'm distorted. It's from sitting at the piano. And you know how you sit at a piano and write music like that?
Yeah.
Because you're leaning over at a funny angle. And he would sit there and voice one chord. I mean, he spent his whole life trying to voice B minor 7 flat 5 in a different way, than had been done, and with whatever instrumentation. And you can sit there and work on one measure forever. Because there's so many possibilities. And one day, and it's just because you're orchestrating it. You just, it might be a couple of notes in the lead and it's 2 voicings or whatever, but you can sit there forever. Which is, I think some people are made for that. I don't think I am. Even though I love it, I don't think I am made for that kind of, life of a hermit and
right.
That whole thing. It's hard. It's hard work.
It sure is. That kind of writing that you talk about there is a kind that, it's not that formula writing.
No.
This stuff, that formula writing, you just go in and just sort of crank it out.
Yeah, those guys that can just do big band charts and that.
Yeah. But those are not the charts that I don't think I'd like to hear. They might sound nice, but you can hear that formula aspect about them, and they're not as pleasing for me to hear as something like what Gil Evans would do. Just sitting down there, just working out that way of playing that B minor 7 flat 5, 1,000 different ways, and each way, and finally, which one are you going to use? You're going to throw a dart at the dartboards. Okay, we'll use that one. Because you've got 4 or 5 of them there that will work fine there, but you can't use all 4 or 5 of them. Maybe one course you use one.
Right. You can do that. There's so many possibilities, and I know for me the formula thing, which I don't quite even know enough about writing to know the formula, although I know harmony.
Yes.
But I'm so slow at the piano, but so I sit down and I ended up having to do it by ear. So I would formulaically say, okay, the minor third, to have this minor second, that'll sound good, and I want to have some of that tension, and I try that, and then I just start moving my fingers around, and then I would find it by ear. So starting out with theoretical, but then ending up having to do it by ear anyway.
Right.
Ending
up rolling the dice.
Yeah, kind of. And you roll the dice. That is involved. Let's face it. I know Gil Evans rolled the dice too. And everybody does. Because you know enough about music to say, well, this should work.
Right. That's a much more fun way for me.
Yeah.
And the band that we put together in the 60s, which is really essentially what this music is that's going to come out next month, everybody in the band could solo. Which was different. Musially you have a band where the solos are delegated to the people that either want to solo or can solo, or that will improve the music some kind of way. But everybody in this band could solo, And
Who was in the band?
Oh, we had people like, I'm going back here a long ways. Pepper Adams played with the band from time to time. Joe Temperley. And there's some alto players. I forgot what these guys, you see their faces now, but I forgot what their names were. Randy Brecker came down and said with them. Mike Brecker. Lou Tobacco came and played with the band. Chick Corea. Joe Chambers. Ron Carter came and sat in with the band. It was a rehearsal band. I mean, this wasn't a band that was destined to make all kinds of records and do all kinds of things and become famous and all that kind of stuff. There was just a rehearsal band.
A way to hear your music.
Right, yeah. That was, in a way, for me, a way to get better at the craft of writing, orchestrating, and scoring out parts for a larger group. And so it worked in both ways. And it also worked, it was in the summertime in '66 when there wasn't a lot going on in the daytime. And at that time, if you don't have a lot to do, you can wind up doing all kind of destructive kind of things. And so this was a way of kind of discouraging some of those evil, I'm not so sure that we completely did that, but it was a way of distracting.
Get those kids off the streets,
right,
into the rehearsal
that
space.
kind of thing. And they wanted that too, you know, so it really worked out great along those lines. But I had no idea that that the interest that was shown about the band. I mean, there was all kinds of people that would come down and hear the rehearsals. I had no idea they were there. Teddy Wilson told me one time that, yeah, I used to come down and hear that band, man. That band really sounded good. That blew me away. I'm standing facing the band, and he's behind me, so I don't know who's coming in there. Slide Hampton would come by, and just people would be back there. And then later on, guys would tell me, well, Slide was sitting out there, or Teddy Wilson was sitting out there, you know.
Where did you play?
At a place called the Dom.
Oh, I remember the Dom.
Right,
in the Electric Circus. Was
Yeah,
upstairs.
St. Mark's Place.
Right, on St. Mark's Place. And it was at that
So you
time.
guys could go in and play in the daytime.
Oh,
then.
right, yeah. We'd go down 3 days a week, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we didn't have music stands. I mean, that was a luxury, right? So we'd use chairs as music stands. I mean, we didn't need music stands at that time. But like a couple of years later, we had progressed up to the point where, hey, Joe, look, we gotta start getting some music stands. And we went around to this place called Upsurge, which was on 19th, if I remember correctly. Tom DiPietro. Were you around here at that time? Upsurge Studio?
No,
This was a rehearsal studio, and it became a recording studio.
I think I remember DiPietro.
Right, yes, on 19th. And everybody used to come around there and rehearse. And this guy used us as guinea pigs, putting the egg crates up, trying to get a more acoustically correct sound space. And so when he would record, I would wind up with recordings of our rehearsals. So I got a chance to hear this back rather than carrying the memory of it from the rehearsal home and trying to remember 6 hours ago, well, this chord sounded that way. It sounded, I mean, I had the tapes there after a while, and that just, man, at that point, growth I just went straight up to the moon from there. You know. But
Jimmy Heath tells me that he uses, when he writes his arrangements now, he writes them on the piano, but he does them on the computer so that he can hear them before he actually brings them in. Says that it's a remarkable tool for an arranger.
The reason that I got into the computer is to, I mean, it's been a long time since I would be writing things out on little bits and pieces of paper, and only I knew where they were. I mean, if they ever got lost, then that would be it. I mean, well, the world will never hear that, you know. So this is a way of organizing. You've got the whole orchestra right there in front of you. In terms of the computer, I definitely hope to get sophisticated enough to be able to use it the same way he uses it. I mean, you know, as the orchestra is right there, or whatever it is that you need, the whole thing is right
You
there.
got it all right there?
I mean, it's less expensive that way, trying to call a rehearsal and somebody's not there, you got to call back again to make sure the first trumpet player is there or whatever. You got the whole orchestra there. And then after that, you just hit a button and just bring these things out on the printer, store them in there, and you never lose parts. I've lost a complete chart, one of the best charts
Oh, no.
that I wrote. I mean, this was at the end of, I mean, I guess I might have graduated on some level, or graduated ready to go to the next level of writing, orchestrating, that kind of thing. I did a chart on a tune of mine called Serenity. And how do you lose 19 parts? I mean, I haven't seen one of these parts.
Wow.
in-
And did you have a score on it too?
At that time, I wasn't writing out scores.
Yeah, you're just writing out.
Writing out the parts
Right.
on little pieces of paper, but I had it in my brain. I mean, I knew these charts. I mean, I knew them inside and out. I wrote them, right? But if I had been sophisticated enough to write these things out like a score and then transpose the parts off as well, I didn't do that. You know what I mean? I just would write that.
But that's hip that you didn't have to do that. You knew it so well in your head, right? You worked it out on the piano and you knew it.
Right, but you're so vulnerable there. I mean, like now, I mean, there's nothing I'd like better
But back then, well, I don't know about then, but I mean, back to Gil Evans, he told me that, there weren't any copy machines.
Right.
So, I mean, it meant you would have to sit down and copy it over by hand, so nobody did that, so things got lost.
Really, and man, I get these calluses on my finger. I'm writing this music out. Then I got to call the cast together, schedule little rehearsals and stuff like that. That just gets to be a bit much. But I think I'm better off for having gone through that. You know what I mean? Because if the computer had been there, I would have missed a lot. By not going. That would have convenienced me so much. That would have also guided me away from some real juicy, fat parts about that whole learning curve.
That brings up an interesting question. People today who learn jazz, learn how to play, use a different process than probably you guys use.
I discourage, and I'm not anti-paper, writing and reading music and stuff like this, or transcribing, that kind of thing there. But this idea of, I used to do a lot of clinics. I haven't done that many recently because the schedule just got so busy. But there was a time when I started showing up at these clinics in the summertime, these Abersol clinics, and they started passing around charts that somebody had transcribed the music from. And people were just zapping these things up. And I'm saying, oh, no, that's not the way to do that. You want to do that yourself. You know what I mean?
Learn the tune yourself.
Yes, you want to learn the tune yourself, If you got to transcribe it off the record, you got to do that yourself. Every time you set that arm down onto that record to transcribe 7 notes or however many your brain can hold, you got to get the rhythm right and all of that kind of stuff. You hear something different. One time you do it, you're keyed in on your main focus, but you're also hearing what the bass is doing at the same time. The next time you do it, you're aware of what the piano is doing at that time. The next time you prove out those notes, you're hearing what the drums did. When somebody hands you a sheet, that's all you get is you get those naked notes. And you miss so much like that. I think that's why a lot of the level of improvisation has come down so drastically in recent years, because it's the convenience of all of this stuff that they got out there, these aids, that people are not getting that close to the music like I think I did, and perhaps the same way with yourself, It was just me and that record player there.
Well, that's the way I learned for sure.
Did you learn by the sentence?
Yeah. I'm a few years younger than Joe, but still, that was the only way to learn. There wasn't this huge bulk of jazz educational material. There was a guy who sold fake books who would come to the local music stores, and they had what was called the Modern Jazz Fake Book, which was fantastic because it had these Charlie Parker tunes in it, which really did help me a lot. But that was it. And then after that, it was, you sat down with a record and tried to figure out this mysterious stuff that was going on. From, it was like learn the head, but also, listen to what Miles is playing and try and figure out, and then you could, I think that's the only way to learn, and that the amount of time that makes you put in with ear training and learning how to get a sound on your instrument and all this. Instead, it must be so confusing now to have, well, I've got my transcriptions, I've got 700 pages of Joe Henderson solos, and then from the internet I've downloaded the entire Charlie Parker transcriptions. That would be terrible, because you'd have to sit there, you'd be confusing. But if you sit there with your CD or whatever and have one song that you really love, and you spend weeks learning it, that kind of time, the music comes into you in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think every young musician has to come back to the same thing anyway, of doing that, the way Joe was talking about having done it, and the way I've done it. You got to internalize it. You can't. And the thing about those clinics is all these kids are reading lead sheets reading the songs out of the real book and not really learning them. You
Right.
got to learn it. It's got to be part of you.
So they come out being excellent readers.
Yeah. and you know, I mean, and everybody plays the same licks because they have the same books. So they learn some Coltrane licks or some, you know, some certain ones, and you know, you got to figure out which licks you want to copy because you have to love them first, you know, and you love them, and then you get the record and you find it, and you take a long time trying to figure out what it is, and that leads you to your own style and all kinds of stuff.
Do you think that is in part responsible for the lack of unique individuals among younger generations?
Oh yeah, I think it leads right back to that. I mean, what I used to hear, I used to do a sufficient amount of adjudicating when I first moved to California. They had these big bands out there, and they would try to get somebody that had a couple of records out there, and I guess I qualified for that, to come in and to help the students by, you know, giving them a few pointers here and there. And but out of 50 bands, they would all come there, and all of them, I mean, not 49, but 50 bands played this rocky, what is this tune that...
Gonna fly?
Da-da-da.
Right.
Da-da-da.
And they all played that.
Well, that was
Theme from Rocky, Maynard Ferguson.
Maynard, right.
Oh, he was terrible.
I mean, it's great chart and all that kind of stuff there,
Yeah.
but when you hear that thing 50 times, man, it's
But that's
just,
when there was no other big band music that year but that. You know?
Right. So I'd come in there with some of the charts that I had. I'd bring a couple of charts and play a couple of charts of mine with the band. They said, "Oh wow, there's so much demand out there for that these days because of that. Everybody's doing the same thing, and everybody is sounding the same. You don't get the that individual fingerprint like you used to amongst players, because everybody's sort of they're tuned into the same channel, so to speak,
Yeah.
and which is not allowing them to get to themselves and to kind of ferret out of themselves whatever uniqueness that they may have, you know.
I have a little theory on that, and that's that I think that right now, jazz as a career or whatever is something that more kids are going for than ever before. Then there are more kids in schools, in music schools, because there are more schools, and there are more kids saying, well, what do I want to do? Oh, maybe I'll be a jazz musician. But when I started out, and all time immemorial before that, being a jazz musician was not really something that anybody did, you know. I mean, it would be like a great thing, but it was like not something that anybody did, period. There were very few jazz musicians anywhere, and there were only the greats, and then, you know, the people that wanted to do it, you got weeded out immediately because there's very little work. But now we've got this, you know, educational system, which I went to Berklee School of Music. You know, I came through the earlier years of the same thing, you know. I went there for a couple of years until I got a gig and was able to split and work. But now, the whole thing of going to a university, there's so many universities that have jazz programs, and learn how to play from, you know, everybody shares the same solos and everything, and there's just so many of those kids.
But there aren't that many more gigs, are there?
There aren't any more
Right.
gigs, there are
Yeah.
fewer gigs, and so there's this huge amount of people that can all kind of sound maybe kind of alike. So I think that out of those, you're going to find some good players. A small, very, very small number of individuals.
Right. I used to, when I got to California, I'd run into players out there that were 14 and 15 years old that were incredible. I'm saying, wait a minute, how did you learn this? I mean, you know, when you consider their contemporaries, I mean, you know, usually at 14 years old, you're going with the crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to stand out and be different, you know, unless you got a real strong sense of who you are. And your individuality kind of comes out there. But, I mean, to ward off all of that other stuff that's out there at 14 years old is can't be that easy unless you've got unless something has bit you. You know what I mean? You know, I guess I got bit pretty early on, so I don't remember even trying to do anything else. It wasn't that I set out to do this. It just wound up after a while. Damn, I've been doing this for a long time. Well, for 20 years, and then 25 years, and then 30 years. These days, if people get in front of that and say, look, I want to do this, I want to be this, I want to be that. I just happen to have wound up there some kind of way, you know what I mean? Without all of those schools that John was talking about earlier. But out of all of this similarity that's happening amongst a lot of these people, there will be some strong individuals. I've seen a couple of these people. They eventually came here to New York and are just making out like bandits here. I mean, because they deserve to be, you know. But it's also amazing to me how they were able to maintain that focus when you just got all of this other stuff out there every day that everybody else is going towards. And you've got this one individual that's going this way and everybody else is going that way. When it's easier just to go that way and follow the crowd and rather than go this way, because it's pretty lonely going that way. You're just going by yourself. But these people that really, I mean, nothing else matters to them. You know, I mean, being part of the crowd, it doesn't matter. They're focused in on something that they want to do, be a jazz musician, so-called jazz musician.
You mean like an Albert Eiler?
Yeah, that's a good case. Even though at that time in the 60s, I guess the late 60s, that was a kind of a new movement. But then it started to, there were several people around that also joined that movement. What was his brother's name?
Donald.
Don Liner, played trumpet? Yeah. And the drummer, he used to live in Philly, he lives in Paris now.
Sonny Murray?
Sonny Murray. And the ESP, that label. And the people that couldn't find an outlet with the majors, you know, then went with ESP. But that was definitely different from, I mean, it wasn't that unique because Ornette had preceded him, you know, and I guess he was a kind of a derivative of that concept, but it was different, you know what I mean? And you had to be a man alone at that time.
Yeah.
You really had to be alone, you know what I mean?
But is there anything, do you hear any bold experimentation like that happening today? People who are really willing to take their own path outside the mainstream? Anything on the scene like that today?
I don't, and you know, and that kind of distresses me somewhat. You know, with all of this stuff that's out here that's the same, I don't find very strong individuals amongst the youngsters. They seem to be satisfied just to be clones of the stuff that preceded them, you know. They're clones of some of the stuff that went on in the 60s. Mm-hmm. I'm saying, man, look at these guys. I mean, you know, when I came up here in the 60s, it was the same with Chuck. I mean, it just happened that we kind of expanded the thing some kind of way by adding on to it, not just becoming another of the son of, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. I don't sense that. I don't know. I don't.
Well, there is the whole quote-unquote retro movement of playing like the guys from Joe's generation. You know, there's a bunch of people that try to play literal Joe Henderson from records. They never maybe even heard Joe live. I mean, they certainly didn't hear him back then when they're copying his style from the 60s, you know. And it's become and I think on one hand that pays tribute to how great the music was that they're copying, and it's become almost like classical music. Well, okay, I'm going to get my shit together and learn how to play bebop, and I'm a jazz man, and a lot of these guys, for some reason, they don't have I would feel guilty if I played exactly like somebody else, but they're so far removed from it, I think. So removed from when those people were real, you know. I mean, to me, the great thing in jazz has been have your own sound, you know, and that you would never think about having anybody else's sound. You'd be embarrassed to have somebody else's sound, because of course we all learn from other people, but you want to try and do it your own way. But I think there are a lot of young people that they're not even embarrassed quite about it, because it's cool. I'm going to sound just like Joe Henderson, you know, did in 1968, or I'll sound just like Miles, or just like Lee Morgan, or whoever. And I think they're so removed from it, chronologically, where it's just like a thing they learn on CDs. So they're so far removed from the thing that made those people what they are that it's okay to do that. And I think that's just a historical thing, or just the times that we live in. It's funny that it's turned out that way.
It is.
Do you think that like jazz and
But I mean, jazz
society?
but jazz. Okay, I'm sorry, but jazz. Really, the reason that Joe turned out, one of the reasons that all these great players, is because of the jazz thought process. Of I'm going to be an improviser. I'm going to have my own sound, and to learn the jazz mentality. Jazz as more than just a. Jazz is a theory, kind of a philosophy almost,
Right.
rather than a kind of music.
Right.
It's more like just a mindset of how to go in and improvise and to swing and to play great music, but with this mindset that you always got, that you're going to do it from this certain way and to do it with a certain kind of style and whatever.
Is it something you have to live to?
Right, I was going to say, it's a
Yeah.
kind of a way of life along with that. But these days, I mean, more recently, it seems to be a kind of a theory. I mean, there was less theory at that time, at my time, I guess. It sounds like I'm not even here anymore.
Joe, you're here. You're here, and it's fantastic that you are, because it's more vital and important than ever that Joe Henderson is here.
Thank you very much for that.
That's right, man. And people love it, because anybody who gets into it enough to really check it out sees the difference and the vitality of it.
But this jazz, this idea that, I don't know if you agree with this, in a way jazz mirrors society. Like in the 60s, it was a time of tremendous upheaval and change, and the music reflected that. Now, if you look at the rest of the arts culturally, how much is really happening in jazz, I mean, is resting on its laurels in a way, not that much innovation. And that's true. Do you think that's true throughout the culture? I mean, does jazz in some way echo what's happening in society?
I think so. I think it reflects the tenor of the times. I mean, it used to, but I don't know that anything is the way that it used to be. Perhaps that's, after a while, you are what you are. I mean, I am what I was being made to become those years, and so I'm that now, so that I am what I am now. There's some different things happening now that's going to produce some different kinds of personalities. I mean, nothing is going to stay the same. I wish jazz could be more of that than, like Latin music, for example. Latin music seems to stay the same. I mean, you got different melodies coming at you, but there's 3/4 of what you hear in Latin music is pretty much the same as it was 40 years ago. But with all of this fusion and all that kind of stuff, jazz seems to be getting ripped out of its roots some kind of way. It's fused with this.
But then, Joe, that's the guys that are playing. There are a lot more straight ahead players now than there were 10 years ago.
Oh yes, right.
They might not be quite as good.
Right. Yeah.
But,
yes, right. There are more players, I think, because there are more people into the music. There are more people buying the records. There are more people that understand and know about the music than it was when I was between 20 and 30 years old. I mean, it's probably doubled or tripled or quadrupled by this point in time. So there are more musicians out there, but as you say, the level of sophistication may have suffered a little bit in this mass acceptance. I've always truly believed, and I still believe quite a bit of that today, that this is a music, as much as we would like for it to be, it's just not a music that's meant for everybody. And I don't mean that on any kind of arrogant kind of level. It's just, it's been a special kind of music, and unfortunately, a lot of the musicians, maybe 25 years ago, started to envy the financial parts of it, seeing musicians who, I guess in their minds, were not probably as good as they were, borrowing elements from jazz, fusing it with this, fusing it with that, and going out and making $1 million a day, and sitting down and dividing up $1 million every day amongst 4 or 5 different people. then that envy thing I've seen some musicians that just didn't even want to be jazz musicians. Take that word jazz off of it, you know what I mean? After jazz made them to be what they were, then they got to the point, you know, you get to a point where you start to kind of talk back to the teacher. I mean, you start getting all of this stuff, and you get puffed up with this, puffed up with that, and then you go in there and you start arguing with the teacher. I mean, that's healthy in a lot of ways, but to see the music get distorted out of what it was originally, and not suffer from non-growth, has been a reason that it's hard to even recognize people that speak of jazz. I mean, it depends on who it is that you're talking to when you talk about jazz. I mean, if I'm talking to somebody that's like 20, 30 years old, what I understand as being jazz is something almost, not totally, but it's quite a bit different from what they're talking about as being jazz. I mean, and this has come from, it's just been ripped out of its roots that it almost has no identity anymore. Like it did, it had a strong identity in the 60s. But now, you listen to something on the radio, is that jazz? One person thinks, well, that's jazz. And another person thinks, well, no, it's not quite jazz.
But they're not going to know it the way you know it when jazz really had a particular flavor, you know. Although I think a lot of the young people are trying to get back to that, and you can't ever completely get back to anything because it's not the same.
Right.
But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And when you talk to some young kids, they're going to think, "Oh, jazz, yeah, I heard that before." And then they'll play something that to you sounds like rap music or something, but maybe with no words, and then they think that's right. Yeah, I know. And I mean, you know, I'm one of the real instigators, you know, because I played a lot of fusion music and been in a lot of those bands, and
oh, I like fusion.
And I know, I know that, and I know exactly what you mean. You know, I mean, I most of the fusion music I didn't like, but I was lucky enough to play, you know, with Miles or on things like that where I thought it was really high level, and that stuff. I'm sure glad that it happened. I'm really glad that Herbie Hancock and Miles and Weather Report existed.
Right, yeah.
You want me to get it?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. That's right.
Joe Henderson.
Joe.
1 second, please. Hold on, this is not Joe. Hold on. Joe, it's John Clark from Music Express. You want to speak to that?
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, oh, John. Right. Oh, okay. You've been there since 2:15. Oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay. Great. Yeah. And what car company are you with? Okay. Great. All right. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Is that all right?
That's sure. He's been there since 2:15. I thought Jody. I thought she might have. Maybe she didn't think to call him in. I'm thinking 3:30 of that other appointment. So I guess he didn't get the.
But he's going to wait for us, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. He says, "Just look, I'm here."
That word fusion, like, it has a different meaning, it seems. Like in 1969 or 70, it meant Miles and Chick and Bitches Brew and that whole thing. And now it could mean, like, dare I say it, Kenny G, or that stuff they play on CD 101. The stuff where, unfortunately, a lot of people think that's jazz. They say, well, that's fusion jazz.
Isn't that incredible?
Isn't it? Once Duke Ellington said to Dizzy Gillespie that word bebop, he said, as soon as they put a name on what you do, it diminishes it.
That's true.
Do you think that's true in titles of trying to categorize things? And
I think nobody can live up to their category once they're categorized. And it's really bad for artists. And none of us, I think we all try to not think like that.
Yeah.
You know, once somebody says what you are, then you start to feel restricted. And then start in the back of your mind, you might think, well, I'm not that. Maybe I should do what they want me to be. Or you know, they'll get confused because they just said I wasn't that.
Yeah.
Now I want to be. So you got to just forget about all that stuff.
Really?
And play, you know.
I think so. I think you just have to transcend all that the best that you can and just go for it. I know I had to start to think, look, it's either good or bad. Either I like it or I don't like it. Either I react to it or I don't react to it. And that's the only thing that, whatever it is, you know. But there's something that, about all of these different concepts trying to hitch themselves to this sort of this jazz train. There's something about me that resents that, you know, and I'm not so sure that it's fair for me to be that way. And I hope I can do better at that. Because either music is good or it's not. Either you like it or you don't like it. And whoever it was that boxed us in that corner or painted us in that corner by calling it this or calling it that, I guess they're partly responsible for that. But I also wonder why, I'm trying to not mention names here, and it's causing me to stutter here a little bit, but why all of these people want to hitch themselves up to this sacred institution when they have to fully know within themselves that whatever the parameters were at the time that I was 20, 30 years old, and the definition was pretty much there. I mean, you knew jazz when you heard, that's jazz, that's pop, that's something in between. I mean, these people that are hooking themselves up to that name, that perhaps maybe are not that, but then who am I to judge that? You know what I mean? Am I making sense here at all?
Mm-hmm. I think I know where you...
Right.
It's weird when you hear those people use that word.
Yeah.
And when they really, I mean, there's a lot of lip service to jazz with kind of, you know, rock stars and stuff, and it's really strange. And all of a sudden they'll be talking about jazz, or I'm going to do a jazz record. You know, and Sting wants to do a jazz record when that came in. And then when it came out, it sounded to me like his regular tunes, which are cool. You know, it's like Sting music.
Oh,
you know, but he all of a sudden he thought he had a jazz record because he had a tenor solo on it. You know, and that's confusing to the kids, you know, when they start to see, because, and it just means they have to do a little more research, but that's just what happened, and something happened, you know, people knew what jazz was, and then
now they
don't quite.
They don't quite know what.
I mean,
what
you know,
it
the
is.
aficionados do, but I think that's the sign of the times. It seems to be this big thing that happened about 20 years ago, where when rock came in and fusion came in, and the jazz thing that had been building since the 20s, since Louis Armstrong, just sort of stopped rhythmically, you know, the swing rhythm, which was everything. All of a sudden, it's funny because all the pop music, Frank Sinatra, everything swung, you know, up until when rock took over, and then things changed, and so now there's a new generation of people that really have no idea rhythmically what jazz was about.
They don't have a clue. And then when they went from rock to rap, it got pushed even further aside, to the point where, I mean, now there's a bunch of people around here that are talking jazz and thinking jazz that have a completely different understanding from what I do. But me, maybe being a little bit older and being able to see things from the 50-yard line maybe a little better, I think it's easier for me to kind of get with them than it is for them to get with me. And I don't mean that on any kind of arrogant level. You know what I mean? I'm not coming from that zone there. But perhaps it's better that you can't quite put your finger on it. But then, what's all these new titles that they're coming up with? This modern contemporary jazz, or either adult jazz or contemporary adult jazz. I mean, what's going to happen next? Computer
I got
jazz.
a new one. I heard a new one in England. Now, you've heard of hip hop, right? Which is another kind of jazz. And I said, well, tell me, there were these kids that work at the record company over there, right?
Yeah.
And they were telling me about this new group, and they were saying it's jazz. And I said, well, tell me, what kind of jazz? And he goes, is it like sort of like hip hop jazz? You know? And they said, no, trip hop. I said, oh, okay. God, it's trip hop. Like I was supposed to know.
Oh, man.
But, I mean, those labels will mess you up every
Really? I mean, we are just swamped with these labels. I have to keep studying up on what that is.
But then that'll mess you up too if you really try and get it, because you're going to end up very confused. Because
Really?
a lot of it is industry or whatever generated by people that need to put names on things to sell it.
Okay, I was
You
just
know,
gonna
Yeah.
ask you.
I mean, I'm not sure, and I couldn't tell you, but I bet you anything that trip hop is pretty damn close to hip hop, you know, and or whatever, you know. It all sounds like funk to me. It all sounds like those funk rhythms, you know, and the names are ways to sell the music, ways to categorize it and sell it, you know, and ways for people to talk about it. Everybody loves to talk about music. I mean, people, you know, the Joe Schmuck down there, you tell him you play jazz, who knows what that's going to mean to him, you know,
But why don't they do that shit to classical music, man?
well, I think they, in a way, they do. Can you imagine being a 20th century composer right now, and you told the cab driver you play classical, you write classical music, and he would think you were talking about Brahms and Mozart.
Right.
Right, but you might be into some Schoenberg and some, you know what I mean? And then he would come to your gig, and he would be, well, that's terrible. That's not classical. I like classical, you know.
Coming there and listening, ready to hear some Bach.
Yeah, right.
But I mean,
But I know what you mean in that country western and Latin music and those things still have the rhythmic thing almost. It's almost like the rhythm or the forms
right.
that have become classic forms.
And you
know.
can definitely put your finger on it without a doubt.
Yeah.
That's country and western. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's rhythm and blues. I mean, when I was younger, they called it rhythm and blues.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But now, when it comes down to the jazz, it's almost, well, if you can't call it anything else, call it jazz. Some kind of jazz.
Well, I think anytime they hear somebody blowing, taking a solo, no matter how lame, or they just see a saxophone and they call it jazz.
Oh, right.
You know, they just see a sax.
Exactly. You're exactly right, man. I've had. Are you a jazz musician? Based on the fact that they see me with a saxophone.
Right.
They haven't heard me play it. They haven't seen it. Is that
Right.
right. Are you a jazz musician?
Well, also, you know, people say the same thing to me, but they say, well, what kind of music you play? They see me with my guitar, right? I say jazz. They go, wait a minute, that's not really. You don't look like a jazz musician. You look like you're a rocker, aren't you? You know, and they think I'm in Peter, Paul, and Mary or something. You know, because I have a guitar. You know. Hello. Who? Hi, Jody John here. We're doing good. Is it time to go? We're going to wind down here, huh? How are we doing? Do you want to talk to Jody about this? We're winding down, okay? How many minutes? Okay, so give us another 5 minutes to end this thing, and then, okay, bye.
Is she downstairs?
She's going to come back in 5, and
She's gonna come up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else you guys want to say?
I've said it all.
I think so.
I think it's so confusing, these labels and everything, and the one thing if I could just play at what feels right,
Yeah.
you know, then I'm okay. But when I start to think about this stuff, and I think young musicians, I guess that's who read this magazine more than anybody, they get caught up in labels and people telling them what kind of music to listen to and what kind of music to like. And
I guess perhaps it's easier for them to be able to identify it one way or another. Maybe there's something about it that's easier for them when they do. They just can't be good at what they do. Good improvising if that's what they want to do. They got, well, this is jazz, or this is rock, or this is fusion, or this is country and western, or Latin, whatever. I just want to have a good time and enjoy what I do. I want to enjoy the people that I'm performing with and that sort of thing. And that's all that's important to me anymore. You know, the labels. I took the labels away. You know, I mean, if somebody else puts a label on me, well, I have no control over that. You know what I mean?
you know, I think that the jazz, you know, when you look at jazz and Louis Armstrong and those guys that started the stuff that became popular in the 20s, and then it went and it mushroomed. The whole idea of jazz mushroomed to overtake every kind of music. Other concepts came in, orchestral jazz, you know, big bands.
Right.
Bebop was like even more intricate, you know, really some heavy stuff going down. And then free music came in, and modal just to play on one chord instead, and all these great things came in. Great, you know, it's like a rush of things. It wasn't. I mean, the players were really brilliant, but it was open to do that. And now I think it's really dispersed right now, that there aren't any. I mean, if there was one great idea that came in and pulled everybody to it, it would happen. But it's more dispersed. Not that everything's been taken up, but it's a time when people just have to do their own thing because there's not one movement, you know, and you have to just take whatever you know and do it your own way. Because there isn't one thing right now. And I don't think it's a matter of people being less creative, because there's Joe Henderson, there's me, there's some really good stuff going on out there. And there's some great young musicians too. But there isn't one movement like the bebop movement that we can draw on, you know?
And that I guess for a lot of people it has to be more interesting to have all of those different flavors out there. You don't have to kind of narrow it down to 1, 2, or 3 different sort of concepts. There's just any number of ways to, any number of roads to get to Rome. And I think that's probably better.
Maybe so. Well said.
I mean, as long as it's a nicely paved road with the proper signs out there to direct you to Rome, I mean, you're